Cool.
Cool.
All right. Brief intro for the stream people. We just talked about Richard is giving the next remaining 3 sessions before the assignment presentations on your part. And it will talk about mobile development or mobile programming from an industry perspective in particular. We'll talk about some aspects that you have talked about already and some aspects that are new to you, and just point you in different avenues of interest you can look at as well as part of your assignment, of course, but also beyond. So we want to kind of bring this course closer to reality, to industry use perspective. So at this stage, I just activate the screen so we actually see what you are showing on your screen. Good. The floor is yours, Richard.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Christopher. Hello, so I'm going to talk to you about hybrid mobile development in industry, some projects that I've worked on. I have come primarily from the games industry. So my background is 10 years in games now, and then 1 outside, which is mainly just a hodgepodge of small jobs in the start of my career. So like IT, one was even like a games mod, which was a very bizarre job. There is some web as well, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that my experience in web 5 years ago is relevant now, because the industry moves on quite quickly. So I had like 9 months, I did a bit of HTML5 development in the Phaser engine, and a bit of Python internally. So the more recent games I can talk to you about, and the relevant mobile sections, are these. So there's RuneScape, which just won a BAFTA, I think, for its old school mobile version. So you might remember that that was the first multiplayer user dungeon game. So it's like a precursor to WoW, basically. I don't know if anyone plays it or not.
Yeah, I liked RuneScape when they made me not second English.
Oh, that's good. Yes, it's good for making friends as well. Another project I worked on was Jagex Transformers Universe game. So that managed to get all the way to a beta launch, but then they cancelled it because it took too long and the technology became out of date, basically. And that was a browser-based game. My more recent project was this My Child Levensborn game. So that's a nurture Tamagotchi-like simulator where you adopt a child after World War II in Norway. So I don't know if anyone's heard about that. It's been in the news. First Norwegian. It's the first Norwegian company to ever win a BAFTA film or games. So yeah,
It's a big deal. So
yeah, it's nice, and it's a serious game as well. It's a serious game that everybody likes. So if anyone thought serious games aren't well liked, there you go. There's an example of one that's not that. After working at Jagex for 4 years, I moved to Norway, and I've worked at a number of companies. So Rock Pocket, Megapop, Krillbite, Sarepta, more recently, and then I've just started my own company now. So we have like 3 staff, and we're working on VR and AR games, hence the portal. So that's more mobile VR focused.
So what's the name of the company?
What's the name of the company?
The name of the company, yes.
It's going to be called Progress Interactive because it's going to be a community-based game. So we're so small, we can't make the whole game that overlaps the whole world, so we need people to add quests and local content into it. So it's kind of like you mod your local town, basically. So then that makes it more affordable to make. So yeah, I'm based in Hamar. I've got a small office in the Hamar Game Collective, so I'm sure that you know about that group of companies there. And I'm part-time lecturer here, so I'm on the staff here. I do a couple guest lectures in, but I'm more in tenure than I am in.
Particularly again, game programming is thing, right? So next semester's course in the autumn.
Yep. So I want to make a distinction here between cross-platform in mobile and the games industry. It's like it's a very different sort of setup. In games, you have your engine layer, which acts as software as a service. So they provide you an API that harmonizes your achievement systems and leaderboards So iOS and Google have their own ones. You have analytics services, A/B testing. They have pipeline tools, they have editors, and of course they have the game engines. So they try and manage as much as possible how to deploy to multiple devices. Before this was out, it wasn't possible for small companies to make games for all these different devices. It just wasn't practical. But now most of the development in games is on these platforms, and then there's a few companies that can make their own engine, like DICE and the Frostbite engine. So these engines are actually like quite bad for mobile development. So if you wanted to make mobile apps, it's kind of unlikely you would pick Unity or Unreal unless you were doing a gamification project, say like a Tensi in Oslo. They do a lot of training apps. And in that case, they pick Unity because it's primarily for games. I think Unity is also used by the oil industry a lot for simulation. Unreal, it does do mobile, but it doesn't seem to be as popular as Unity because it's kind of trying to tag that onto the engine. So Unreal is more recognized as high spec, but Unity is more recognized as the best platform if you want to go to mobile. But we're going to cover the mobile platforms that I've looked in later as well. Even though these platforms do try and handle the deployment of the devices, that doesn't change the design problems that you have from hybrid. You still have to solve some problems. The market share is very much dominated by Android at the moment. This is the US market, so other markets aren't the same. I think iPhone's actually bigger in Asia. But it's entirely dominated by Google and Apple at the moment. The problem, though, with the Android market is the device fragmentation. Like with iOS, you only have a handful of devices, so they have small differences between them. But Android has so many different devices. There is methods for dealing with that and publishing to Android. I think that's something that Maris wants me to talk about in another lecture, so we can talk about that at a later date. But I think we will mainly talk about how you actually, have your UI set up and which frameworks to pick.
The figure looks good though.
It's colourful.
The figure looks good though, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, this is from a few years ago as well, so it's even bigger now. It just grows and grows and grows. So the fragmentation issues that come up with this are memory, operating system compatibility. Some have features that the platforms demand that you implement. You have your processor speed, GPU. Some of the input devices are different, like certain buttons are missing in some other devices. And you have the platform holder might demand, if you have this phone, you have to activate, for instance, the home button, which we'll cover in a moment. There's also aspect ratio and how you manage icons. So one of the things is, even if you can get your UI to kind of like scale and update and move correctly, if you're working on like a high DPI tablet, it's not the same if you're working on a small device because everything's kind of like scrunched up. So what did appear kind of like very visually clear is no longer clear when you shrink everything down. So I think this is like the term they call it in mobile development is like responsive UI design. So they have different versions of icons, so they kind of swap between them automatically based on scale. So you, on the smaller ones, you don't need as many details, but people can recognize intuitively what the icon means. So this is the My Child game. Got some, I'm not sure if that's Japanese or Chinese, maybe some of you speak kanji. It's Japanese. Cool. So in this game, we have all the buttons down at the bottom because that's easier to get to for if you're right-handed or left-handed. But what we didn't realise was when we released, we didn't cater for the iPhone X. So the iPhone X doesn't have a home button like this. It has this menu you need to open and then you need to click on things. But in order to open it, you have to be able to click and then do a gesture, and that doesn't work if you have buttons in that space. So it's something that we didn't design around to begin with because we didn't capture all the requirements of the devices. So that was a mistake on our part, basically. But as a small company, like, the best we can do is to buy an iPhone and then a latest Android phone, and by the time we finish, those phones are out of date. So we have to buy the most expensive phone because by the time we finish our development, it will still be in use. So it's quite pricey for a small company. We did outsource this to China, but they didn't pick it up because I think they want us thorough because they were contractors, and that's kind of a problem with outsourcing.
Is there any form or any way? In the lectures we talked about the Firebase Lab by Google, right? So that they allow you to test applications on different form factors and devices and so on hardware, right?
Yeah.
Is there any way of getting virtualizing on real hardware, like actually using that Firebase Lab, meaning the latest device, and of course pay-per-use and so on, but actually then kind of develop in the cloud as opposed to locally, because the emulators, that sucks, right? So that's not a solution really. But and those are not running on the emulator; those are actual devices. Is there any way of doing this? Because that could make your life a lot easier and cheaper, right? You could migrate on the fly.
I mean, if we did have a service of that would be better. I mean, we didn't really see that. I think with these game companies that provide these platforms, they only really cater for the aspect ratio. They don't cater for the features. So I think the service would have to capture the features as well. But this does kind of, if there was a service like a UX service, that would be very, very handy. So I think there's something in the later lecture where we actually have the UX designs of this. So I'll come back to this later.
Sure. So it's just a comment since you were talking about this challenge.
Yeah.
The price aspect.
But we did try to capture this initially. So with the Unity engine, I think a number of servers provide this, is in order to achieve a UI that handles different aspect ratios, you tend to have an anchoring and pivot system. So both the Unity and Unreal engines have UI that dynamically scales. So here you have a rect transform, which is kind of like a scene graph for UI. Do people understand what a scene graph is? Yeah, cool. So this is kind of a scene graph into 2D space.
No, they should. They're from graphics. They just learned about it.
Okay. So there's different aspects here that you can use. I will just pull this up. I am in the test scene. I don't want to show you this because it is ugly. So here we have, I'm working on a UI. It's currently in within Unity, but we are looking at different solutions from this. We'll cover the different options we have available later. But the interesting thing I want to show you is how the pivots work. So here we have the scene in Unity, and we have the scene graph. So from the canvas, which defines the 2D area, we have different groups which change the alpha. So you can create groups and then turn them on and off. But what is the most interesting thing is how the pivot system works. So Unity has, if I click 2D, will just snap. Yep. So Unity has these anchor pivots. So you could set these manually. These are just the values in here. But if you click on here, it allows you to select where the anchor and pivot points are and whether it will dynamically scale or not. So this one is pivoted to the right. You can see the red thing there. And then it scales up and down. So here it resizes the scale on the vertical, but not the horizontal. So if I pull it out, it stays fixed to the right hand side. So this would cater for both a horizontal layout and a portrait layout. So the clouds would fit behind. This is a little problem here. So you would have to, I need to do something where if it does go to portrait or someone shrinks the screen, I don't want it to kind of go to infinity. I want it to change its anchor preset there and then swap back based on the aspect ratio. So that's something I'd have to add later. So yes, that's how the anchor system works in Unity. The issue that we had with this was with the UI display here. This was the problem. So we had it dynamically scaling here. So you had different devices and on a different aspect ratio. Everything kind of works the same way. You don't really have to change any anchor presets, but because it wasn't captured, we totally missed that, and our game was taken off the App Store. So it's very destructive to realize at the end of the project you didn't capture all of the device requirements and you have to completely change your game.
How long does it take, like from an investment point of view, right? So because the idea is to weed out things early to minimize the maintenance cost and so on, right? So how much time does such a modification cost you, like in terms of time, hours or days or weeks? I don't know.
It depends how interconnected the knock-on effects are. In this scene, you have carefully designed screen space, so you have certain areas that are reserved for certain UI elements. So at the front, you always need that free for an interactable area, and you also have some spaces here that are free from the interactable area, and then the characters are always there. So when you click on the character, I could show you guys if you're interested. Do you want to see a little video of the game so you can see the mechanics?
Sure.
Yeah. See if we can get a Japanese playthrough or something.
Yeah, that was.
You're going to see all my videos that it's listening to. It's trying to find some songs.
Guys, this is Apple Rap. I'm here with.
You can see I'm an Austrian economist as well. Content warning. I really didn't want it to be a trigger warning. I was like, no, don't use that word. So it's like neutral, stay neutral. So you basically pick your child, and then we have a deforming 2D character. So their face moves in like, I'm not sure how many degrees. I mean, we can get 90 degrees out of it through blending between different different 2D faces and animations. But I think this is only kind of like 30 degrees left, 30 degrees right. So, I mean, when the text is up, the whole screen is reserved for notifications that pop up. And so if you click off the screen or anywhere, it activates. Now this is right at the start, so it has all the tutorials. So this is kind of a boring level because it's just, you know, teaching you how things work. You have multiple choices. underneath you have different emotional effects. So there's a system where you have different parenting styles for your child. So you can be a little bit more caring and supportive, or you can be a bit more kind of like strict and just kind of be to the point and just be kind of like, you're going to get bullied at school because your dad was a German soldier and there was the Second World War. But like, it's up to you whether you kind of talk to your child about who his father was and these things. So the idea is, if you rub the face, the child is supposed to react. So you have a limited amount of time in the day. That's what the time units are for. So once those are used up, all you can really do is kind of like physical interactions, kind of like rub, hug, and you have to decide like whether you're going to do your chores around the house, or whether you're going to play with the kid, or whether you're going to work overtime so you can buy the kid more stuff. So it's kind of like there's some statistics balancing in there as well. So it's important with the play spaces that you always reserve these areas. So for instance, this is the interactable area here. You might need to click on objects to move between rooms. So for instance, if you want to move to the here, you can either click on the table or you can click on the counter to actually cook things. So there isn't actually any free space. So if we go back to here, the cost of having to move things around because you didn't capture this requirement is pretty high, because you're kind of covering it up. So yeah, and basically what happened was we just had to shrink it all down, and it looked a bit bad because there wasn't we weren't able to kind of push it up. So it could have meant that we had to kind of redesign a bunch of other features. So that's the My Child 11's game, My Child 11's Born game. Do you have any questions about that? Interested about it at all? Boring?
Interesting. The game. Most games aren't that serious in what they do, and that was to cover something realistic and serious.
Yeah, we had to go about it indirectly. So it's more about being a nurturing parent simulator, and it just so happens that it's in post-World War II Norway, and you sort of learn the history by newspapers coming in, and then you have to interact, write letters, work, and then stuff starts coming in from the schools and from neighbours and stuff, and you realise like the kid is having a real hard time because he's because of his father, and he's kind of distressed about it. And because you have the different parenting styles, you can sort of decide how you help the kid handle that. So in a way, you can't stop it from happening. You can try, but it's very difficult. You can't change society. So it's more, how do you prepare your child and how do you make it through the story? And then you get kind of like stats at the end, and you like the Walking Dead game, so you can compare with other people, and then we get statistics that people can do research on. So it's all kind of useful, but it was a difficult topic. I think it was banned in half the European countries when we won the BAFTA, and then because we won the BAFTA, they decided to maybe we should let the game.
Half of the European countries?
Well, half the big ones. So France, Austria, Germany, Sweden, Russia. So the big ones.
Why was it banned in Germany? It's because they're so. It didn't have anything to do with Nazi films or like Germany.
Well, the father was a Nazi, so I don't know. We don't know why. They just said prohibited content, and then we asked them what prohibited content, and they just said we don't specify. So, but we could change it. We could change it, and then sorry, we don't comment on individual cases. And then we kind of made lots of articles and be like on Twitter, just like, congratulations, yeah, shame it's banned. It's like, maybe you should write about that, Mr. Journalist. And then he did. So, and then they kind of allowed it in Germany. I'm not sure about France yet. But yeah, that's kind of cool. But it is a little bit, I guess it's a little bit edgy to kind of go, look, he's the son of a German soldier, but like, don't blame the child for the sins of the father. Don't blame Germany.
That's a good, that's a really good premise. So like, if you want to tell a story or if you want to say that, then that's a really good place to actually do it, because it's a good point where Nazis were evil, of course, but that doesn't mean the child is evil.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very present. Like Katharina, who was the lead designer on it, so I was the lead programmer, she's the lead designer. She started tweeting about the the Syrian refugees and the ISIS children. It's just like, it's difficult, because even I'm like, it's kind of, there's all these ethical questions it raises, which is interesting, and how much we should kind of bring it into the present is a question too, because it was very much for the Lebensborn children, the families in Norway. Like, I think the Norwegian Prime Minister actually came up and said, like, for the first time, we done goofed up because we didn't acknowledge it, because it was better, it was easier for us to not acknowledge that this was happening to those people. Because it was happening to those people, they kind of enabled it. They kind of enabled the kind of abuse and discrimination towards them. So, I mean, that's kind of nice in a way. They're kind of like a little bit redeemed in Norwegian society. So Norwegian society now kind of cares about them, goes, that was wrong, I'm really sorry. So at least their children kind of get the "we're sorry" message. So I imagine they would be happy if any Lebensborn children were alive today. But the people who knew them are alive, so it's something. But this is probably more on the game module that you guys will be doing. Yeah. So we'll be talking about kind of
different classes.
This. so back to the hybrid programming. So programming solutions to UI. I'd like to talk to you about how we structure UI in games, and how we handle multiple platforms. So I think patterns are broadly the same across programming languages. So even if you're doing like a web-based or Java-based language, the pattern is pretty common throughout. So if you do it in one language, you can do it in another. So the most common one, which you may have heard about, is a model view controller, MVC. Has anyone spoken to you about this before? Yeah. So this is particularly useful because of its one-way data flow. So you start at the view layer, you get your input, people select buttons, and then that simple logic goes down to the controller, which decides what to do about it. And then the controller can query information from the model or update it, and then these are separated from each other. So this way the view can be interchanged pretty quickly because it's not convoluted with the controller. So you can have many views, but the controller logic can be retained and you don't have to touch it. So it's very good for simplicity and also for quickly iterating and handling different view sets. Another pattern, which is you probably use along with MVC, is the observer pattern, and then you have your options subscriber. Who's done observer? Everyone? No one? Hello.
Hello.
Hi Marius, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So nobody's come across the observer pattern? No. Wonderful.
Implicitly? No? Okay, well, go for it. Give them the whole thing. They need to know that.
Come with me. Come with me, guys. Do you see me? Hello, hopefully. They can't speak to me, obviously. You're here retrospectively at a different point in time. Oh god, someone's made a mistake. Okay, never mind.
You guys know callbacks, right? Yeah?
Go back.
Please.
Ja.
Okay, good.
Okay,
That's
we can teach
I'm
you.
that tired and hungry, so I'm not entirely here.
so you're not entirely here, and you're not entirely sure if you know about callbacks?
Callbacks, they sound.
Anyway, Richard, let's do your magic.
Yes. Okay.
Blow us away.
Okay. So, say you have a subject that you want to monitor so you can react to it. So, let's say you have your application and you're waiting for user feedback. You're waiting for something to happen. And then you have different buttons in your application. So here's your mobile. Let's look at Lebensborn, for instance. And then you have your different rooms and your stats at the top. So your subject wants to is the thing that defines the state of things. So within the subject, you have an event, and then you have methods for registering a listening object. And the benefit of this is you are sending your listener, which is basically just a method signature. So it's like it could just be a simple parameters function. So like on room change. Maybe we'll just call the function room change. So it's a simple signature parameterless. And this function belongs to the observer. And the room change delegate is the method signature must match the event. So when you register and listen, what you're waiting for the subject to do is to call you back when that event happens. Otherwise, what you have to do is every frame you're polling it, you're asking it, has the room changed? Has the room changed? Has the room changed? Has the room changed? It's very inefficient. You don't want to do it. So this is where the observer comes in. So it delegates its responsibility to the subject. And that's why it's called callback. Make sense? Yeah. So very cool. So here you have your register, your, I'm really bad at doing this. This is your listener. And this is your listener. And this subject then invokes the event, and then this callback happens, and then the observer can decide what to do. So you can have many observers to one subject, and the subject doesn't need to know anything about these. That's not its responsibility. And the observer class, like, normally this is the interface, so you just specify that this interface has this method, and its responsibility is to just handle that the room has changed, but the subject does not know about this code. So it's kind of a nice decoupling, although it's not the perfect decoupling. Or perfect, maybe a strong word. It's like, we can do better. So the problem with this is the observer, which any class can implement, has to find the subject. It has to know where the subject is in order to get the reference to register. So that is a form of coupling, even though this is good for decoupling. So how do we completely decouple the subjects from the classes that are observing? And the idea is to use the publish-subscribe pattern. I believe that's what it's called. Nice. Publish-subscribe.
Yeah.
That's the kind of like event bus
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
So here you have kind of like arbiter in a way. So in industry, it's normally the event bus, but you can. It also goes by publisher, subscriber. So here you have many subjects, And rather than the subscriber, which are your observers, they're observing something else. So I'm going to call them subscriber. But in brackets, I'm going to say observer because it's basically the classes that implement the delegate. They're still waiting for the callback. So these subjects, what they need to do is, rather than directly calling this back, they're registering to particular channels. Or event types. There's different ways in the messaging system to do it. And the subscriber, all the subscriber needs to do is kind of go, I want to register to the channel, and I'm only going to listen to events, messages of this type. So, you know, there's different ways you can do it, like I've seen people doing it by string, index, enum. You can filter things, for instance, by range. So in games where often events are bound by spatial organization, so you have like spatial grids or rooms. If there's a sound event, for instance, like you shoot your gun, you want people in that room to hear it. You maybe want people in the hallway to hear it, but in the other room, past the locked door, you don't want them to hear it. So you can use the event bus to kind of say, anyone that is subscribed to these channels will hear about this event. And it's the publisher's responsibility to kind of go, I am in the corridor, I am in the bedroom, and they won't hear about subjects that are in the kitchen with the garden wrench and such. So that's one way to think about it. But this system is good, and I've seen it used in a mobile gambling game, for instance, as well. So I believe it's commonly used everywhere. Maris, you are more the traditional mobile man. So publish subscriber. Have you covered it yet?
No, we haven't explicitly covered that.
No.
No.
But this is pretty much bang on, but it's a very game-centered explanation.
It's fine. Yeah.
That's fine.
We've had some publish subscribe with the cloud course last semester, but in the mobile we didn't.
Yeah. So this is your, think of the event bus as the publisher, and these are kind of writing articles for the publisher, and then the publisher decides how it's distributed. There is another method as well, which I think I'd like to talk about later, and that's event and message streams. So one of the architectures I want to cover in a little bit is React. So the reactive extensions I've seen allow us to register for groups of events that are being fired. So the problem with input is you might hear one event's happening, but that's happening in isolation. So you don't know what's happened before. You would have to keep track of that yourself. Every single class that's listening for callbacks would need to manage all the state of the game, and that's going to be really convoluted. So reactive extensions and reactive programming focuses on being able to kind of work out what sequence of events happened. So that's really good for things like gestures, double clicks, and then those events are kind of broadcast and can be handled, and they also have some very nice syntax as well. So have you covered React at all?
No.
No.
We covered Dart and Flutter.
Flutter?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote some slides in Flutter.
Good.
I deleted some of them. So I was like, okay, well, I don't want to bore you guys. So you can think of it in a way like gestures or double click, or trying to think of a game setting when we use this. I'm actually mainly using this for input, to be honest, in games. I think the reactive extensions are, the uses are pretty similar between traditional mobile and games.
Okay. Moving on. Other useful patterns. I just want to cover these briefly. The command pattern is basically something that encapsulates a command call, so you can call it at any time. So usually you just need the method, you need who sent the command, and you need to know who the receiver is basically, and have the parameters too. So the command pattern, it's really good for storing up how you should respond to input events if you wanted to kind of like do them later. It can also be really good for debugging. We used it a lot in our Lebensborn game for allowing the designer to basically specify after these things happen at the game, these certain event keys do this. So we would have like the command name and the parameters, and then that would be taken from their spreadsheets and then inputted and converted into a C# definition of a command. So you might have done this already. Command pattern? No? Really good pattern. Really recommend that you look into it.
We haven't covered patterns.
Okay, well I'm just going to cover them briefly. If you want to look into them, I'm sure Maris will cover them in a lot of detail later,
Or someone in game programming will cover.
or someone in games programming will cover them.
What would be a suitable fit?
I've actually already got these lectures, so I can
Cool,
I can cover them later. But yeah, there's a number of different patterns that build off other patterns. So for instance, the command thing is just something that you execute. So that might be part of, say, a builder pattern, which always has like a build method, or a template pattern, where you have a number of classes that run the same method over and over, and they kind of add the functionality to it to build up a different kind of UI. So you can think about, a common example is these patterns are really good for, say you have pizza and then you want to create many different pizzas. These often are different versions of a factory pattern where you move the configuration code and the construction code out of your main game loop, so you don't have to handle it now. But there's slight differences between them, and if I'm just talking about them off my head, I'm going to confuse you, so we'll go into more detail later. Maris, I think we missed the MVC talk. I think you missed that one. I think that's the most important one.
Yeah, we had the MVC.
Okay, good.
So MVC we had
Okay, so
early on, because it's the kind of a fundamental pattern for mobile programming in general.
I'm pretty sure it were also mentioned in previous class for mobile database, I think.
Yeah.
yeah. Let's see. So, did I lose? I think I lost the slide that I wanted to talk about. Or did I? Where did you go? Okay, so what I wanted to talk about is things that I investigated for another game that we've been working on. So this game is basically teaching the story of Ibsen's Pagans. Who knows Ibsen's Pagan? It's Hall of the Mountain King.
Oh, nice. Really?
Okay, I'm on camera, so this is
Homework, play
recorded.
that game, learn about your own culture. Come on.
I'm trying to conserve your culture. I'm not even from your country. Yeah, conserve your own
But
culture.
anyway, so I think
Yeah.
I was expecting 100% feedback here, but
No. Okay. So basically we've been commissioned by the guys that do the play, so they all dress up in the costumes and the troll things, and they tell the story of an adventurous young Norwegian who always thinks there's more to do and he can always get more. Then eventually he learns the folly and the laws of Jante. I think is the story. I haven't actually read it because it's in Norwegian. Which is kind of ironic because we're making the game. It's not just me, so it's fine. So yes, here's a bit of concept. I'll show you a little bit what the game is. This has to work in schools, so this has to be streamed to web and mobile, and their computers are often quite old, and it's unpredictable because we can't contact all the different schools and ask them what particular type of old computer they have or old device. So we just have to make sure that it has a very low quality and it is very efficient initially, and then we will kind of scale up the difficulty later. So I just want to prepare you for the lack of normal lighting and shaders. But we have intentionally gone for a kind of like a more painted style, but it does look very flat without the lighting. So we don't even have a logo there, so it's that early on. But it's, it's still early days. Like, we have time basically to kind of work on the quality settings. So if we release the game on Steam, it doesn't look like it's made 12 years ago, like the devices it's running on.
That would be nice.
That would be nice. We are quite upset having to work on it because we're like, no, the IP is so wonderful and we have to make it work for 12-year-old computers. So it's a little bit like torture. In a way that it really does hurt the cost to make the game for so many devices over such a long period. So we have to look at a way to make our solution more hybrid. We also have different problems because we're giving it to schools, so the teachers might not know how things work. So like, do they want to help young kids install apps at the start of their lecture? No, they don't want to do that. They want it just to kind of be like, it works. So this led us to look at different solutions and different architectures, because it is possible to embed Unity within native applications. So one of the projects I did was for a VR fitness company. So we had this bike, and you had the Oculus on, and then you were riding on the bike. You also had like a tablet if you didn't want the Oculus headset, and then you would. The idea was you would play different games, like either mountain biking, or I wanted to make a Wipeout game, like which is the kind of the flying ship. So you'd be cycling, and there's like a dynamo-powered speedster, and then you'd turn. And then the bike would actually turn and you were in VR, and everyone thought it was a wonderful idea, except of course you just kind of fall off the bike because it looks like you're going really fast around a corner, and then you're going to feel the momentum, but then you just have actual gravity and then you just fall off the bike. So it didn't work. I got someone messaging me the other day and they were like, so are people still making that bike? And I was like, I don't know, I don't think so. So I think that project died, but they wanted the unit to be embedded in a native app, so they could have like their native UI, and many different games went into that solution. So I know from doing that it is possible, and I have found some implementations of more mainstream hybrid app frameworks that embed Unity into their applications, which is great because then you can make use of the modern web frameworks along with Unity. So I'm just going to talk about Unity and some problems with it initially, and then talk about some of the other solutions. So Unity is a C# language. It's built on Xamarin. So Xamarin created Mono, so you could write an application that would work on iOS, on Android, and on Windows computers. And that became the .NET framework. When you create tools using Xamarin, it creates this XML-based language, which you can then configure to get things to operate in the correct way. I think I did something with WPF in 2011, where we made a user interface tool for designers, so they could configure the Transformers universe level. And that was kind of cool in the way that you could graphically set things up, and then it procedurally created the code for you. And I think that's a very common thing in the hybrid app frameworks, where you have visual editors where you can move things around and it generates the code, and then you can go into the code. But the problem with this is because Unity has built an entire stack of services starting from 2009, 2010, they were kind of fixed to a very old version of Mono, so that makes it kind of difficult to write plugins, because that version of Mono is very, very old. But they are trying to update it, so that's one of the problems. So it's not without its issues now that the stack is so big. Other solutions that do things a bit better are there's the slide I was looking for, are Flutter. You know Flutter, so we'll keep that short. Flutter is particularly useful because it has such a dynamic storm of widgets and animations, and it's probably going places because of Google. It doesn't have the full feature set that, say, React or Angular does, but it's Google, so they'll probably keep on working on it. So it looks very promising, and I know that you've already covered that, so I'll move on. So another solution that we looked into was Angular native script, and then embedding Unity within Angular. And Angular is particularly interesting because it also has I'm not sure if that line should be there. I think that shouldn't be there. Sorry, no mistake. Did some copy paste. So the thing about Angular is it is a fairly big feature set, and that was one of the reasons I didn't want to go with it, because it required it generated quite a lot of code. It wasn't kind of as clean as, say, React was. But it was compatible with progressive web apps, which is what I was looking for, because the thing about deploying to the school is they just want to kind of like go to a website and get the game, but they would have to do that every single time, and then we would have to provide a service where they download like 2 gigabytes of game. We need it to be cached. So either we would really want a native app, but they don't want to install it. So progressive web apps looks the most promising way forward. So for that solution, it was really a choice between React and Angular, because Flutter, as far as I know, doesn't have progressive web app support just yet, or no one's done it. I'm sure someone will, but right now they haven't. React is interesting because yeah, this is the line that shouldn't have been in the Angular one. Because they also have they also go for VR, but they use JavaScript. and CSS and stuff like that. So it allows kind of like web developers to kind of get into the VR scene, which they're not normally able to do. It provides a useful abstraction on top of the document object model. So I'm sure that you guys know what DOM is in the JavaScript space.
They should know.
Now they should. That, right from the outset.
Would someone like to explain to the rest of the class?
Good one.
I mean, after lab with the RSS feeds, everyone should know.
Someone be brave. You have to realize you're wrong before you can be right.
Can I get the keywords?
Keywords, yes, exam question.
A keyword that can probably be taken from it, but that was backwards because there are so many different potential examples.
Document object model, right?
Oh, that stuff isn't that you are loading. Brain is not functioning.
Yeah, you're on the right track. I think you have it.
For example, in that we were loading from XML, and then we were loading it into documents, which we could take data from and manipulate.
Fundamentally, the idea, right? So you have a document tree, right? So you have a comprehensive representation of the XML file. That's one single tree structure, and that's the tag as a document, right? Because you have the different elements and sub-elements and so on. So you have a tree structure there that you can then navigate, manipulate, and so on. But we are consistently working on this coherent structure, right? So and then is the alternative of having sax parsing, right? Where you only parse individual elements, which you probably did for your RSS feed. Like you only look for opening text and closing text, opening text and closing text, and thereby inferred that you must be somewhere in that structure for a particular item, for a particular SNS feed within a particular channel, right? So that kind of stuff. So, and that's the two different pathways. And yes, DOM is exactly that. You load the entire document in one go from XML and then manipulate.
Yeah. So
Very much.
yeah, MongoDB also has a document model, but that's for storage. So you can create an entire tree and index it in a hierarchical way. It's all done by naming keys, I think, DOM and Mongo. So progressive web apps, it's like probably isn't a term that you've covered just yet, but the idea is that you have service workers that feed the application things it needs to run offline. So when you next open the app, you don't actually need a connection. And it also, on Android at least, you get a little icon that looks like an app, but it's not installed through the App Store. So that's probably exactly what we need. Someone goes to a website, app appears, people can download it, but you're not going to get that from Unity. There's no one who, as far as I know, no one has created a progressive web app with Unity. So I'll probably be the first one to document it, I guess. But I think the benefit of doing this is quite large. So this is the framework that I'm interested in following, and I can talk to you about some of the benefits of reactive programming and why I think you should look into it. What we could do is we can have a little discussion and decide what you want to cover in a later lecture, for instance, because we've got 2 more lectures. So if there is something that you want to look into more, we can do that. We've got some ideas about what we think we should teach you, but you can give us feedback. Yes, so React in Unity is the thing that I think we should look into. So this is a really simple application. It basically just adds mybuild.json, and then it just has the Unity content, Unity loader startup script. So this is the thing that basically allows Unity to be embedded into a WebGL application. And Unity loader will just start up the Unity app and it will sit inside. So this would allow us to have our web interface here, but we could actually construct this in React. So that would mean while we're downloading the rest of the game, the UI will appear immediately, and then we don't actually have to load up the whole game. So they'll get their instant response. The kids will get something to look at, and we could actually have the entire login code before the game is fully downloaded. So we're sort of delaying, we're buying time for the game to come, because it takes a long time to download many gigabytes on, say, like a 3G connection when you're on a hill somewhere on your phone. And I think that's one of the problems with WebGL we have is the load times.
Is that also concerned to take into account? Because you just mentioned the example of having 3G on a hill, right? So I mean, there's a considerable cost associated with it, right? If you're talking about downloading 2.2 gig or something.
Yes.
So how do you deal with this?
Well, we're hoping that we'll be able to get Unity within a progressive web app, because then you'll be able to download it and cache it locally. Unity does provide some ability to cache, say, asset bundles, but then that has a problem with memory. So trade one problem for another.
Yeah.
But yeah, we need an immediate response though, because we need the game to start playing now. And I think that's one of the issues that we have with native apps, is they're very fast to load, and web-based apps aren't as fast because you've got to download everything. So native is also always superior. So if you often see a lot of big companies, they build native apps on both stacks, because for them they want the performance and they have the money to do it. But a small startup that only has X budget might not be able to get to market in time. So that's why we look at hybrid solutions, even if it's not the most performant. So it just has to the data just has to get there. But in this case, we definitely need to stream it, and then we don't want the game to start loading its big levels and stuff like that until later. So I was thinking this could be a fun thing to look at later, perhaps. It's like, see if this works, see how this performs. Because I need to do it for work, so it might be nice. Other things I think is worth looking at, I'll just get this open, is control click. I noticed one of my ex-colleagues has written a very nice article about reactive extensions, so I would check it out. So this is a chap that I met in Tonsberg at Rockpocket. You may know them for Moons of Madness. Anyone seen that? Lovecraftian spaceman game. Funcom's making it as well. I think Funcom are publishing it actually.
What was it called?
Moons of Madness. Okay, it's fine. But yeah, I worked on the Shiflings framework, and also their Ollie and Spike game, and tools for creating this game where you had a character and a dog and you jumped between dimensions. So he was working on that with me as well. So reactive allows you to work in a sort of like with lambdas, anonymous methods, and to register and observe event streams and handle things in an asynchronous way. So a lot of Unity is very much synchronous and runs on the main thread, which kind of sucks. It's also not very performant, so they're trying to change that. So reactive extensions really allow us to write responsive code, but to do it very cleanly and concisely. So he has a number of solutions. So yeah, these are some of. This is very much like Link. One of the things I might want to cover with you is using Link, writing extensions, and programming it in this sense where you can get the data that happens asynchronously. So like either in a coroutine or a thread or whatever. So that takes a period of time, and then when it returns, you want to skip 10 from what's returned, and then take 5 of the collection, and then you want to run this mapping function, and then subscribe to the result. So it's pretty cool. might be worth going through.
Can you link that article on the mobile sites?
We should, right?
Yeah, we should do that.
So, yeah.
Yeah, the
Access to the GitLab report.
yes, it actually might be better if we actually go to the Git repository, because they have a lot of documentation there, whereas that was more sort of in depth him talking about it. This is more matter of factly. And there's another article experiment here. So here you have your linked-ish methods. You have where, which is a link method. So there you're passing an anonymous method, a number of lambdas, and then when you get the result, you subscribe to the result, and then you kind of can respond to it. So in a way, you're kind of filtering events for certain responses. So this is kind of like event streams, basically. So this is pretty cool in the sense that you would need to have like many different callback methods, and then the callback methods would kind of go, if this has happened, or let's remember the state of what happened before, and then let's have this result. So this is a very clean way. This is really lovely compared to what we normally have to do in Unity. So observable, get this, then we catch this exception. Yep, lovely. And support for multi-threading in Unity. Wonderful. So very, very kind of clean and concise. So what you want from your code base, you don't want it to get very convoluted and complicated. Okay, yeah, here's another nice example. So here you're subscribing to a mounts down event, and then you get many of those. You take it up to a certain point, and then using the mouse position, then you can respond to it. Here it just kind of responds to it with a log. Okay, it's pretty nice. So this might be something fun to do. I don't know if Maris minds, but one of the things might be cool if we could do some AR or some VR stuff. I would be more comfortable doing it in Unity, but we could look at Android Studio as well, because Android Studio is obviously ahead of Unity, because Unity has to put a team on updating to the language features of whatever Google churns out. Do you mind if it's Unity, or do you mind if it's... Okay, so we could look at both this and then implementing this in an AR application, or we could look at React as well. So there's a bunch of things we could look at. We have 2 lectures. Google Cardboard as well. So we could actually have a bunch of people looking into different things during the lecture. Could we do a lecture and have a little bit of lab
Sure.
time?
I mean, I don't see any constraint in doing that in principle. But again, it's only those 3 lectures left, so it's not much. 2 lectures now. So not a terrible amount of space for material anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So, but I think give an overview. But if there's an opportunity to do something hands-on, of course, that would be nice. But it's sometimes hard to say how many people show up. We have this representative crowd of 8 people right now, or like let's say 10. It's a rough gauge out of the 60 which we actually have in the course. So it can be all sides. You know, the scale is unknown. There's a bit of a uncertainty there. But I think it would be good to have this group of students that are attending decide on what they want to learn, what they're interested in, and then we can talk about what a sensible format for that would be.
Yeah.
Right? So what's sensible within the time frame. Because on the other hand, you also need to note that the other room, C07, lecture room for tomorrow, is like a more classical lecture environment. So it's not good for doing anything hands-on. Like, well, not for you it's fine, but for students it's not particularly handy. For group work or the like, whereas this room here is quite good for that.
Yeah.
So
we could look at if you guys have phones, we can, of course, like if you guys have like decent phones, like Android phones, or you can even use an iPhone if you want. We could try and set up your phones for development. So in later lectures, then we can like actually talk about publishing things, for instance, on Android.
Yeah, I mean they have to develop on their phones, hopefully, right? So
Yeah, so I have developed on it so I can actually use it with Android Studio. I mean, it's
Okay.
annoying to use the emulator all the time.
because they need to use sensors, and then at that stage you usually fall over using the emulator only.
Mm.
Right, so they have a fair bit of exposure there. So it doesn't need to be in the sense that we need to do something real time, but getting an overview, getting entry point into if I want to do develop with Google Cardboard, so like how could I attack this, right? Or if I want to use React, what would be the same in conjunction with Unity, for example?
Yeah.
What is the sensible pathway? Because it naturally leads over into next semester as well for you and them at the same time, because it may well be that you encourage the development of mobile games, right? In game programming, but don't want to explicitly teach it, so that would be a kind of nice link here to get this across, right? But probably it's sensible to ask the audience what they would be interested in hearing. From the catalog that Richard has just
On this podcast.
yeah, now we go. So we broke all the possibly had here.
I didn't know.
But yeah, so didn't we. So but in terms of interest, right, what would you guys like to hear about? What would be of interest to you? AR, VR, more React, perhaps integrating with Unity. I mean, you have a diverse set of backgrounds, right? Most of you are game developer or studying game development, I guess. But perhaps you have other interests with respect to mobile devices. So those few sessions are a bit loosely defined in a sense that the core content is kind of delivered anyway, and you are well into developing your own project, so you shouldn't rely on the content here anymore as input per se, but it should spawn your interest or basically motivate you to look deeper into certain areas. So it's your time to have your voice and shape the course a bit.
React or Unity, maybe, and I'm not too interested in VR personally, mostly because unless it's a high quality headset, it will be annoying for me. I have double vision, and with my glasses and such, that is also problematic. So,
okay, yeah. Well, the point is, VR, I mean, it's conceptual. We're not running around with 58 VR headsets here, so that's not going to happen, mostly for the reason that we don't have 58 VR. We're happy if we have one, but if it's learning about the technology, it could also be valuable. But okay, so you're more on the React Native, React.
There's also VR and AR. So there's things like we can do with some of the stuff we've done in AR with markers as well. So like for instance, you can have a marker, how we set that up, the different AR services, and maybe we could spawn some things on the phone. So if you see the marker, something can spawn.
I mean, the any demo is helpful. If there's an option to actually inject the demo or having some that would be cool.
Yeah.
AR would probably be a more sensible approach because we have the devices now.
no.
More realistic, and it's also lower threshold for picking it up. So cool. I mean, does anyone objecting having an AR session here? Augmented reality.
So we could also put some of the tutorial and the steps up. In the lecture could be about that. So like this is how you do it. That could be recorded for another time, and then we do it. So then the people who don't attend could actually go ahead and follow through the steps.
So it's the next two lectures tomorrow and the day after?
No, tomorrow, next week, Tuesday.
Okay. Not sure if I'm going to be here tomorrow, since I have to actually work on a mobile assignment, and my group specifically needs to basically have it mostly done by Friday. This Friday, not next Thursday. So I kind of want to get 8 hours of work in tomorrow.
Okay, how about we have a more academic-y lecture tomorrow, where you guys can kind of sit, absorb some, look back later. And that would be good for me, because I think we have a client deadline tomorrow as well, so I have to make some changes to the server tonight. So yeah, I think it could be good, because then we can actually get some of the different AR equipment, make some decisions on what things we can teach you.
And then see how far that goes tomorrow, and then from there on decide what next Tuesday would bring about, either a new topic or an extension of the given topic, based on interest and the crowd. Yeah, so I think that's a sensible move.
Okay.
Any other topics you have in mind that you're desperate to hear about? Any topics you have in mind that you desperately don't want to hear about?
Nothing that is likely to come up in something about graphics.
No more graphics.
No, they're done with graphics. Yes, OpenGLES, beautiful. Let's do it. No, no graphics. No, let's stick to the AR VR stuff. There was a discussion about using the board services by Google Play, scoreboard services.
Oh yeah,
And
the
publishing.
achievements and
Yeah.
so on.
So to have kind of a social game
Yeah,
concept.
social interaction.
I'm not sure if that's of value potentially for the audience. To be discussed.
Wasn't there also publishing as well?
Publishing we
We
ran
did,
through the pipeline
yeah.
briefly of how you get it on Google Play roughly,
Okay.
right? So different stages. But of course, if you have a running example, let's say one of your apps, and you want to run through and show it again, that's also very, especially if there's a bit of a richer stats we have.
Yeah,
limited,
exactly.
limited.
What about iPhone? Because
Well, I
that's
don't
kind of hybrid native as well.
You guys iPhone people? Anyone?
No, my family are very iPhone, and I'm like, why do you have a Mac? Why?
Because I need to do iPhone development.
No, that was probably
Yeah, like the whole family are like Macs.
I feel the same. Trust me, I have to hold on to the device, and then the battery goes.
Yeah.
So I mean, what we could do is we could go through this. Actually, my colleague, annoyingly enough, he managed to find an emulator, so he didn't have to use the Mac, so he could use his Windows machine to actually build for iPhone. So I could try and get some of the details from him, and maybe that could be useful, because then you could do iPhone development from your own computer, and that could make it more bearable. And we could go through the steps to set
And
it
less
up as well.
expensive than having to buy a Mac or something.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, AR theory tomorrow. Right?
Yeah,
So,
so-
then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Right?
Yeah.
So, cool.
Or we could do React, and we can do AR next week.
Class decides.
Class decides.
How does it work?
Didn't we say we're going to do? I guess we can do AR theory tomorrow.
What do you prefer? Which one do you prefer?
I would prefer the AR technical is done next week, and we could definitely cover some of the theory, but I think we should try and do something with the Unity UI as well. So we should just kind of like go through the little setup from that, because if we want to do the actual AR setup, people are going to have to, have buttons and stuff like that to do.
Okay. Well, just to figure out what should be a priority for tomorrow. So
Yeah.
that's the only thing. But we can figure that out. Take that offline later.
I was thinking we could do it in addition to the AR theory.
I don't know if it fits into that 2-hour block, right? So that's the magic to be figured out.
We can see.
Well, as long as no one has any strong opinions against AR and or reactive, so we're kind of good, I guess, right? So and or iPhone. Well, we have strong opinions against iPhone. We know that. So we have something to cover. So we leave it at that, right? For
Yeah,
today?
I think that seems like a logical
Cool.
end.
Well, you got some input, a mix of what you should look at, how it's done in practice, what's relevant in practice, and shaping the next few sessions, remaining sessions. So until then, happy hacking on your projects. Try to show up tomorrow. I say that today, at no avail.
Well, I mean, I have to get 8 hours of schoolwork in, and yeah, sure, I could use 2 hours of that, but the thing is, you're going to record it, and I can then take it at twice the speed and watch it in 1 hour at a later date. Therefore, only using 1
I
hour
know.
of my
I-
time.
Again, I'm not addressing you individually. I'm addressing you as a blunt, barely visible collective. So
Could I get some honesty? Who's actually going to turn up tomorrow, and who's just going to watch the stream? Someone's going to turn up. Two people are going to.
No. There will. I'm fairly sure there will be at least 2 to 3 other people that always turn up on a Wednesday.
Okay.
Because I don't know why.
No, not me either. Like, what other things could you do on a Wednesday? Like, do we have other classes on Wednesday?
No, we have usually we have sort of set of 6 to 10 people on Thursday that are on Tuesday that are oftentimes non-overlapping with the ones showing up here. So interesting.
Okay.
But either way, the stream is the value, right? So it's about getting the message across.
Yeah.
And it's content. This stuff is examinable, right? So it's not optional stuff, right? So you still have to examine, you know, yeah, you have the project, all good and fun and so on, but there's also the exam at the end, right? It feels like it's in December, it's actually end of May, right? So just as a reminder. So.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, good. So Richard, think about nice exam questions, that's a good idea.
Yep. Nice exam questions, okay.
Cool. I think we've stopped the stream, right?
Yeah, we'll stop the stream. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining. See you tomorrow.